Hello, History 363. So today we're going to be talking about Roman religion. Of course, a huge topic. We could do an entire seminar on Roman religion, but today we're just going to give an overview. And again, in some ways, this is sort of unfair, right? I mean, the Romans only spend a very tiny percentage of the overall Roman experience thinking about what are we going to do with the Macedonians, or gosh, Hannibal's a terrible person, or all the kind of geopolitical things that we've been focusing on in this course. They spend every day thinking about religion. Religion infuses their lives in a way that sort of policy and war does not, even though the Romans are doing quite a lot of war during the period that we're examining. But religion is a constant feature to being Roman. Everything that you do is mediated by a god or the gods, and all of your actions, both as an individual, as a family, as a community and state, they're all based towards maintaining the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods, ensuring that what you're doing is what the gods want you to do. Now, I think it is useful when we encounter something as weird and wild as Roman religion to somewhat think about it in terms of our assumptions of what religion looks like. And I think those assumptions are there whether or not you are religious or the exact modern religious faith you practice. And I'm actually just going to take sort of Catholicism, Catholic Christianity, as a kind of religion that embodies, I think, many assumptions that we have about what religion should look like more broadly. These features aren't in every modern religion or in all of Christianity, but I think Catholicism is a large enough, widespread enough, and I think generally well-known enough religion that it's worth just treating that as our sort of example. So in Catholic Christianity, for one thing, there is great interest in what people believe. Indeed, for those of you who've studied the history of Christianity, this interest actually only increases as we enter into the early modern and modern period, particularly as there start to be Protestant Christians who believe the wrong thing. This is a religion where it's possible to be a heretic, someone who errs in some way or another in their belief. And even ignoring the extremes of heretics and Inquisition, a common aspect for the sort of life cycle of a practicing Catholic, and indeed most practicing Christians, is a period of catechism, usually prior to their first confirmation, in which you actually learn what you're supposed to believe. Modern religions more broadly, but let's just take, again, Catholicism as an example, are very, very interested in orthodoxy, in believing the right thing. And orthodoxy, of course, and right belief is, of course, what separates all of the different little factions of Christianity. Why is a Catholic different from a Baptist? Well, they actually believe some different things in terms of how the kind of mechanics of theology work. So modern religions in general, very, very interested in belief, and indeed defined by belief. Do you in your head have the right idea about religion? And this is something that really matters. Second, we sort of expect, I think, when we think about religion, a clergy that is basically professional, and a clergy that is made distinct from the rest of the secular population. In say, Catholicism, there's a couple of ways of making that clergy distinct. Obviously, that includes special education in a seminary, special religious rituals like ordination, but it also includes, maybe most fundamentally, a taboo, and taboos are one way that you can make a clergy distinct. And this is one thing that makes Catholics and Protestants differ quite radically. And that is the taboo of priestly celibacy, that priests are not supposed to be part of the broader kind of reproductive activities of the laity. Now, maybe more mundanely, priests also have wear special garb, whether it includes highly ritual garb when they're actually engaged in the liturgy, and even in their kind of day-to-day, make themselves distinct frequently by wearing a collar and a black shirt. And of course, that the nature of that garb has changed over time, but there is an idea that if you see a priest just walking down the street, you know immediately that they're a priest, precisely because they're dressed differently than from, let's say, a nice professional like myself. You can tell I'm not a priest simply because of the way that I'm dressed. So that is one aspect. We have emphasis on belief. We have a clearly defined clergy, and in the case of Catholicism, a very hierarchical clergy that goes all the way from your parish priest all the way up to the Bishop of Rome, the Pope. And finally, we would expect emphasis on Scripture. And of course, all of the sort of three religions of the book, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all heavily rely on a different set of sacred books. But nonetheless, the sacred books themselves are incredibly important. They're important for defining belief. They're important for, actually, they're part of the liturgy. And the books are actually seen as, in some ways, inherently kind of valuable and important in of themselves. So Scripture, again, in the case of Roman Catholics, the Old Testament and the New Testament, is incredibly important. In fact, Scripture is central to the definition of the religion, and central again to that first part of making sure that you believe the right thing. Where do those right things come from? In part, they come from the Bible, and of course, if you've studied, the Reformation, a lot of these issues are actually debates over how should the Bible be interpreted, who should interpret the Bible, what access should individuals have to the Bible, including the Bible in vernacular languages. All of those fights that are, people are killing each other over in the 17th century. All of those, of course, heavily relate to the centrality of the sacred text. And of course, we can find sacred texts in other really, key religions, Torah in Judaism or the Quran in Islam. Now, I say this as a way of a long preface. Everyone's probably saying, well, yeah, I know that. I'm Catholic, or I'm lapsed Catholic, or I know, my friend's Catholic. What I'm trying to say is now let's strip away all of those things, maybe 90% of all those things. Some of these features that I described can be found in Roman religion if you kind of look under a rock. But by and large, none of these things define how Roman religion works. So first and most importantly, Roman religion, and this is probably true with ancient Mediterranean polytheism more broadly, does not care about what you think. It does not care if you believe in Jupiter, or if you think that Jupiter doesn't exist, or, as actually become somewhat fashionable, philosophy that is circulated in the Hellenistic age. Some people believe that Jupiter was just a powerful king in Crete who subsequently was sort of remembered as a god. That's a minority belief, but that philosophy is circulating. And guess what? If you adhere to this philosophy, euhemerism, no one cares. No one cares really what you believe. You can believe, for example, as a number of people in the late Republic, that the gods are out there. This is a belief associated with Epicureanism. The gods are out there, but they don't care about human affairs. You believe that? Fine. No one cares. No one cares about what you believe, so long as you engage in the right religious practices. Ancient Mediterranean polytheism broadly, and Roman religion, you might even say especially, is really centers on not orthodoxy, proper belief, proper glorification of God. It centers on orthopraxy, doing the ritual right. It doesn't matter what's in your head. What matters is that you engage in the ritual in a proper way. And of course, most people, the vast majority of people, believe that the gods themselves care about the ritual. If the ritual is right, the gods are happy, and then they bring success to the state, to the community, to the family. But if the ritual is done wrong, then the gods are angry, the gods feel disrespected, and failure comes to the state, the community, and the family. So there is this obsession with orthopraxy, right ritual, right practice. And failures, troubles that you encounter are usually linked to improper practice. We've encountered this a few times in our course. So for example, after the Battle of Drepana in 249, the Romans lose this incredibly disastrous naval battle to the Carthaginians. And the Romans, in trying to explain how the hell did we lose this battle, don't talk about like, well, how were the ships arrayed and what was the weather like, and were orders clearly communicated, and was the plan, was it a good battle plan? They don't ask any of the kind of things that you would expect in a kind of military after-action report. Instead, they ask, what was wrong with the ritual that the general did? And they find something wrong. They said the general, in trying to see whether the gods wanted him to find a battle, the sacred chickens who were going to reveal that by eating, they wouldn't eat, which means he shouldn't have fought the battle to begin with. And then he added to that an additional sacrilege of haughtily and angrily throwing the sacred chickens in the water and saying, well, let them drink. That's why we lost the battle. That is an explanation that totally centers on orthopraxy. It does not matter, Appius Claudius, the guy who throws the chickens in the water, it doesn't matter what he thinks about Jupiter and his marriage to Juno or any of those things. What matters is, did he do the ritual right? Now, without saying, you can find aspects of orthopraxy in modern religions, including disputes over what's the correct liturgy. But I think importantly, oftentimes those are very, very secondary. Those disputes are in some ways almost sort of secular. There's less of a question of does this change our fundamental relationship to God? For the Romans, ritual is how you establish the fundamental relations with the gods. They do not care what you think. They care what you practice. Do you do the rituals right to honor them? That's what matters. And of course, the most important ritual is usually sacrifice. A sacrifice where you can actually sacrifice a whole host of things, all the way from, say, a small cake, all the way up to 100 bulls with gilded horns. But what matters is those things, when they are sacrificed for an animal, the meat is taken aside, the bones and the fat and the skin is wrapped up, placed on an altar and burned. But it's believed that that smoke rising up to heaven, and of course you can kind of actually think about primitive man actually seeing the link in the smoke between the smoke starting off on earth at the altar and then actually rising to the heaven. But the Romans do believe, or most do, that smell of the burning fat and skin and bones is extremely pleasing to the gods, and that's something that sort of nourishes them, that nice smell. And that's one reason why they then reward humans who practice sacrifices in the appropriate fashion with worldly success. Now, who runs Roman religion? Well, there are priests. I would not call them a clergy, however. For one thing, anyone can engage in appropriate interactions with the gods. Indeed, one of the responsibilities of a paterfamilias, of the father of the family, is to make sure that he properly carries out the rituals for his household to ensure that the gods bring favor to his household. So every paterfamilias is in some ways the priest of his own household, making sure that the household religion is carried out in an appropriate way. Nonetheless, there are priests for the civic religion. There are priests who are responsible for mediating the relationship and maintaining the pax deorum with the gods. Now, a few of these do actually have taboos. That, like I say, if you look under a rock, you can find some things that look similar to what we might think about as a sort of aspects of religion. But what's notable is it's very, very few, and those taboos are largely archaic and for most priests they don't apply. So the most famous set of taboos are centered around a priest called the Flamen-Dialis. The Flamines are one of the big colleges of priests in Rome. The Flamen-Dialis is the Flamen of Jupiter, and he has a number of weird taboos. Namely, he can't touch iron and isn't supposed to ride a horse. And it seems that these taboos may have actually been established to prevent him from engaging in warfare. Here's the thing. This is the world's most unpopular priesthood. No Roman aristocrats wants to be stuck as the Flamen-Dialis, so at least very, very few. Because then they can't have a military career and obtain the rewards that come with that. So every time the Flamen-Dialis comes open, there's a host of young Roman aristocrats who are like, not it. Including, actually famously, Julius Caesar is briefly made the Flamen-Dialis, and he works his damnedest to make sure that he gets out of it. So there are a sort of handful of archaic taboos on the Flamen-Dialis. Another notable set of taboos, including a period of mandated celibacy, are assigned to the Vestal Virgins, that is, priestesses who maintain the sacred fire for the goddess Vesta. Vesta is the goddess of the hearth. And the Romans, the Vestal Virgins, what they do is they maintain an eternal fire, a fire that never ever burns out. It's constantly being fed and tended 24 hours a day, 365 days forever. It's a real religious crisis. Every time, there's a handful of times it does burn out. But the Vestal Virgins, while they are serving, they serve from around the age of childhood up until their 40s, are not allowed to have sexual relations. Indeed, if they are caught violating their chastity, they can be executed by being buried alive. And a punishment that is usually meted out oftentimes in moments of military crisis. One question, if the Romans are losing, including after the Battle of Cannae, is has a Vestal Virgin violated her chastity and therefore disrupted the Pax Theorum? So there is this kind of taboo, a sexual taboo associated with the Vestal Virgins. So again, they exist. Turn over a rock and find them. What's notable is once they finish their term, they are allowed to marry, and some do, and some have children. Although it's considered slightly unlucky to marry a former Vestal Virgin. So there are a handful of taboos, but by and large, those are actually the exceptions that prove the rule. Most Roman priests in all of the colleges do not have any really taboos associated with them, and they are essentially no different from any aristocrat who isn't a priest. Now, they do have some special regalia that they wear while they are performing rituals, including special hats and special objects that they carry. But outside of the performance of those rituals, Roman priests look really no different from a Roman aristocrat. If you saw a Roman pontifex walking down the road on an average day, you wouldn't be able to tell that he was any different from another Roman senator. So the distinction between priest and non-priest is very hard to detect in a day-to-day basis. And notably, with the rare exception of someone like the Flamen-Dialis, the priests then pursue, for want of a better word, secular careers, secular career paths, including military career paths, like every other Roman aristocrat. So again, famously, Julius Caesar, while he's off conquering Gaul, is the Pontifex Maximus, and that doesn't prevent him from being elected consul and obtaining a proconsular command in Gaul. So most of the priests are also, you may be a priest, but you continue to work your way up the secular cursus honorum. So our final difference is texts. Complete lack of them. There is no equivalent, Roman equivalent to the Old Testament or the New Testament, or this is certainly not a religion of the book. There is a collection of oracles, the so-called Sibylline oracles, which are maintained, and there is actually a special college of priests who are the priests The numbers range from 7 to 15, sacris faciundis. And when there is, again, a kind of crisis, usually a sort of secular crisis, and there's some question of what should we do, the Sibylline Oracles, an obscure collection of books not widely available. The only people who can consult them are this special body of priests, the Septemviri Sacris Faciundus, and they go and look at the Sibylline Oracles, which seem to be basically kind of gibberish. And they say, okay, well, we've had this disaster. Here's what we should do going forward. And then that recommendation is made to the Senate, and then the magistrates or people can decide what needs to be done from there. So that is a text, although it's a weird one, that does nonetheless have some, is important when the Romans are perplexed as to how to maintain the Pax Deorum. But it's not a text that really it defines belief. Again, it's a text that usually points you towards the right ritual or the right practice, pointing you towards what needs to be done to patch up the peace of the gods. And indeed, other texts related to Roman religion, at least for much of the Republic, are probably largely aids to ritual, providing you with the correct ritual, the correct names of the gods you need to use, the correct formulae. So there are again texts, but they're not texts in the same way as say the New Testament text that is foundational to the belief or the understanding of the religion. One thing that's actually kind of notable, if you believe, as many historians of religion do, that myth is central towards understanding religious practice, the actual paucity of the Romans' own internal domestic religious myth is startling. They take almost everything in terms of their myth, in terms of how they actually understand the character and the backstory and the relationships between the gods. They borrow everything from the Greeks. And this starts out relatively early on, coming from Magna Graeca. It accelerates as Romans come into contact with the Greek East after the Second Punic War. But the Roman understanding of what's Jupiter like, what's Hera like, is heavily mediated by Greek mythological understanding. The Romans don't really have that internal to themselves. And that's actually kind of notable, that even by the standards of ancient Mediterranean polytheism, the Romans are remarkably impoverished about their beliefs about the gods. What are the gods like? How do they act? What are their characteristics? And so much of that is they have to import so much of that rather than developing things for that themselves. It's notable that for the kind of handful of gods that don't have a real kind of Greek counterpart, they don't really have a lot of, the Romans don't have any personality or myth for them. And in some ways that just, I think, maybe points to the fact that Roman religion is in many ways extreme towards its emphasis on orthopraxy versus any kind of broader understanding or belief about the gods. Those are just some initial thoughts. I guess my final thought on Roman religion, again, this is a 20-minute video and we could do a 20-week seminar. It is one thing that I've sort of haven't pointed out in terms of how is Roman religion different from most of the modern Western religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and that's actually maybe obvious, is those are all basically monotheistic religions, and Roman religion unquestionably is polytheistic. And this probably does change it changes how you actually interact with the divine. And I don't want to say how anyone practicing a modern religion interacts with the divine, but when there's only one God, that God there's a sort of sense that God is in some ways distant, not necessarily present. Particularly actually in Christianity, there's the idea that God was briefly present and in embodiment of Christ, and now has died, has risen up to heaven, and is now distinctly not present. And the question is, when will he return? For Romans and for really Mediterranean polytheists, the gods are present everywhere. They are not just present in terms of, okay, Jupiter Optimus Maximus is in his temple in the Capitoline. And there is actually this kind of a belief that the god and the presence of the god overlaps with the statue of the god in their temple. But there is a sense that there is a god really kind of present everywhere you go. This is a world full of spirits. In addition to the big Olympian gods, there are dozens and hundreds of minor gods and spirits that are kind of always there. The god Janus is there every time you cross a doorstep. The gods of your household, the Lares, who are sort of the household ancestors, the Penates, who are the gods of the storehouse, they're always there. The god of Vesta, the gods of the hearth, is there within every single fire. So there is really a sense of the presence of the supernatural, the presence of the gods, oftentimes minor gods, everywhere you go. And there's also a sense that in big events, the gods are in some ways present along with the people engaged in those events. So I think this is one aspect of Mediterranean polytheism, in that there is a sense of supernatural presence everywhere, from minor gods all the way up to the big ones. And that certainly, I think, affects the way the sort of just daily perceived experience of that religion. All right, I think that's all for right now. We'll talk more, I hope, a little bit this week, and then next week we may dive back into our narrative as we encounter the increasingly troubled 2nd century BC.